The moment the wheelchair tipped and her body hit the concrete, the morning stilled. Backpacks froze mid-swing. A soccer ball rolled to a stop. Laughter spilled like shattered glass, sharp, echoing, careless. The girl lay there, breath shallow, arms splayed like wings that never learned to lift. No teacher in sight. No friend stepped forward. Just eyes, hundreds of them watching from the shadows. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She just stared at the clouds like they might carry her somewhere else. But someone saw, and someone moved. And in that instant, her story began to rise. It was a Thursday morning like any other at Oak Ridge Junior High. The buses wheezed into the parking lot, their yellow frames catching the early sun. Sneakers pounded the pavement. Doors slammed. Music buzzed from half-worn headphones. The air smelled of cafeteria pancakes and spring dew thick with teenage chatter and locker room jokes. Naomi Rivers sat near the far end of the sidewalk, waiting for the ramp to clear. Her hands rested lightly on the rims of her chair. Students passed her like she was part of the landscaping, another fixture to step around. Some glanced, most didn't. She moved forward slowly, her wheels making a soft rhythm on the concrete. Just as she reached the base of the ramp, 3 figures stepped into her path. They didn't yell. They didn't need to. Their presence was practiced, confident, and cold. One of them bent low just enough to reach the chair's frame. It happened fast. A tug, a tilt, a fall. The chair crashed sideways. Naomi's backpack slid from her shoulder. Her palms scraped the pavement. Her body curled instinctively, then froze. A moment of absolute stillness followed. Then the laughter began low, at first, then rising. A few phones lifted. Some students turned away uncomfortable. Others whispered. No one stepped in. Not yet. Naomi didn't move right away. Her face was blank eyes fixed upward. A breeze tugged at the hem of her jacket. Concrete pressed into her skin. The world around her kept spinning oblivious. But somewhere in the crowd, one person had stopped. One person had seen everything. And one person had already started walking toward her. The crowd didn't part. It tightened like a slow-closing circle of hesitation and detachment. Naomi still hadn't moved. Her elbow throbbed beneath the denim, and her cheek pressed against the warm sidewalk. Around her, the low murmur of entertained cruelty carried on quick snorts, half-hearted chuckles, the buzz of a notification capturing her fall, and then motion. From the back of the gathering, someone broke through, not loud, not shouting, just moving with purpose. Brielle Washington had only transferred to Oak Ridge a few weeks earlier. She wasn't popular. She didn't play sports or sit at the cafeteria's loudest table. But she saw things. She had always seen things. Her sneakers tapped steady across the pavement, weaving between frozen stares and awkward shuffles. Her backpack still slung over one shoulder, she stepped over Naomi's scattered books without hesitation. Kneeling beside her, she moved with care, checking limbs, brushing gravel from sleeves, sliding a hand beneath Naomi's arm to lift her gently. Students began to shift, phones lowered. The boys who had caused the fall turned away, already blending into the backdrop. Brielle steadied the wheelchair first upright and balanced. She didn't wait for someone else to act. She guided Naomi back into the seat, making sure the brakes were locked. Her movements were quiet but firm, each action filled with intent, each gesture louder than the crowd's silence. Naomi sat upright again, her face unreadable, eyes lowered, breathing shallow. Her hands rested in her lap, still dusted with grit. Brielle stood beside her, not as a rescuer, not as a hero, but as a witness refusing to look away. The hallway monitor arrived late, eyes wide, questions forming but already useless. The crowd thinned quickly, reluctant, embarrassed, dispersing like fog after sunrise. No one answered the questions. No one explained. The 3 boys disappeared into the morning blur of classrooms and bells, leaving behind only the faint smell of power misused. Naomi and Brielle lingered side by side, unspeaking in their silence, one still shaken, the other quietly burning. That day would move on. Classes would start. Announcements would echo through outdated speakers. But something had shifted, not because Naomi fell, but because someone else refused to keep walking. In that moment, Brielle didn't just help Naomi back into her chair. She picked up something else, something heavier than books or bruises. She carried the weight of silence broken, and the day, still fresh with rising light, wasn't done with them yet. By midday, the sun had climbed high and harsh over the campus of Oak Ridge Junior High, casting short shadows across the field behind the gym. Colorful cones lined the grass. Teachers moved between activity stations with clipboards and whistles. It was the annual One Team Challenge, a school-wide event built around the idea of inclusion and collaboration. But that afternoon, the word unity would be tested in ways no one expected. Inside room 104, the lists were being finalized. Names matched into teams, loosely randomized, but flexible, especially with the right influence. Brielle, still carrying the weight of that morning, moved like someone with a mission. Her hand was steady as she marked the roster. One name in particular was added deliberately: Troy Kenner. Same team. No mistake. The field began to fill with the restless energy of 7th and 8th graders eager to escape their desks and win something that mattered, even if it was just a pizza party or bragging rights. Naomi sat off to the side near a teacher's table, a fresh bandage on her elbow, her face expressionless. Her wheelchair faced the field, but her eyes didn't follow the games. She was quiet, folded in on herself, a girl watching the world from behind invisible glass. Troy arrived late, sauntering toward the team huddle with Chase and Logan flanking him as usual. His face carried the same smirk it always did, half charm, half challenge. But it faltered slightly when he saw the name pinned on the clipboard. His, next to hers, across from Brielle's. The teams were introduced. Red shirts, blue shirts, green shirts. The field became a kaleidoscope of color and motion. Coaches gave brief instructions. Rules were posted. Cheers erupted at the starting line. Brielle stood at the edge of her group, arms crossed, expression calm but unreadable. Every move had been calculated, every role assigned. And Troy, for all his bravado, hadn't yet realized what was waiting for him. One event after another ticked by tug-of-war team relays, blindfolded trust walks. But the final round loomed largest, the obstacle relay. And with it, the twist that Brielle had quietly suggested to Coach: the last leg must involve pushing a teammate in a wheelchair through a winding course. Only one person on the team qualified to ride. The sun dipped slightly, casting the field in a soft amber hue. Naomi sat silently, hands folded, wheels angled toward the cones. Troy hadn't looked at her since the teams were announced. But the moment was approaching the part of the game no one else had read into, but Brielle had designed like a blueprint. She wasn't seeking revenge, she was creating a reckoning. And when the whistle blew and feet began to fly across the grass, the trap she had set didn't snap shut with violence, but with consequence. Because for the first time, Troy Kenner would have to carry, not push, a weight heavier than ego. He just didn't know it yet. The noise of the afternoon faded into memory as the sun dipped behind the bleachers. The field, once echoing with cheers and music, now stood quiet, only a few cones left behind, tilting in the breeze. In a distant hallway, Naomi rolled slowly beside Brielle, their path uncluttered but not unnoticed. Eyes followed softer now. No whispers, no laughter, just silence with weight. Word had traveled fast. The obstacle relay had become more than a game. It had become a statement. Some students talked about it like it was justice. Others just called it awkward. Troy hadn't said much afterward. He had disappeared into the crowd, his red shirt damp with sweat, his hands still tingling from the grip of that wheelchair. Brielle hadn't smiled. Naomi hadn't celebrated. Victory wasn't what they came for. That evening, Brielle sat at the far end of the school office, watching the hallway glow under fluorescent lights. Her name had been called to meet with the assistant principal. Not because she was in trouble, but because someone had noticed. Noticed what she was doing. Noticed how she moved the needle without raising her voice. She didn't come with a complaint, she came with an idea. Elsewhere in a nearby classroom, Troy sat slouched in a plastic chair, waiting for someone to call him in. He had expected detention. Maybe a phone call home. Instead, he got reflection. And time. Meanwhile, Naomi returned home quietly. She unpacked her bag, set her wheels against the usual grooves in the hallway rug, and placed the baton from the relay on her bookshelf. She didn't tell her mother much, not yet, but her eyes carried something different, an inward steadiness that hadn't been there the day before. The next morning, announcements rolled through the school speakers as usual: birthdays, reminders, lunch menus. But then came a pause, followed by the assistant principal's voice asking all students to report to the gym for an additional assembly. No one groaned, no one cheered. They just filed in curious. On the floor, a folding table stood near center court. 2 chairs, 1 microphone, and a space in between that felt heavy with expectation. Brielle stood to the side, her posture poised, gaze steady. Naomi waited near the back entrance. Her wheels turned slightly, baton resting across her lap like a reminder of what she'd carried and what she hadn't dropped. This wasn't a punishment. It wasn't a spectacle. It was something harder, a beginning. Because justice didn't always look like consequences. Sometimes it looked like 2 girls facing a crowd, not to demand apologies, but to offer a mirror. And in a school that once looked away, eyes were finally beginning to meet. The gymnasium at Oak Ridge filled slowly, but with more stillness than usual. The bleachers creaked under rows of students shifting in restless quiet. A few teachers stood near the back, arms crossed, brows raised in cautious anticipation. The air buzzed with something unspoken curiosity laced with a pinch of discomfort. No one knew exactly why they were gathered again, but everyone knew it had something to do with yesterday. The folding chairs at center court remained empty as the overhead lights hummed and flickered. The microphone waited alone, upright and untouched. There was no music this time, no decorations. Just the hardwood floor, the echo of feet settling, and a sense that whatever was about to happen might not follow the script. Brielle appeared first, emerging from the tunnel by the locker rooms. She walked calmly, her pace deliberate, head high. Naomi followed moments later, wheeling herself in from the opposite side, her hands light but steady on the rims. A hush moved through the gym like a slow wind curling under doors. They met at the microphone, not in dramatic fashion, not with spectacle, but with quiet intent. The kind of presence that didn't ask for permission. Brielle stepped forward, then stepped aside. Naomi rolled into place, then paused. No one looked away. No one dared to. What followed was not a lecture, not a demand. It was a reckoning carried in steady breath and steady words. Brielle spoke first, her tone calm, her posture rooted. She pointed to the silence of the crowd that day, the inaction that had allowed harm to unfold in plain sight. She spoke not to shame, but to awaken. Her presence wasn't a confrontation, it was a mirror. Then Naomi took the mic, her voice soft, but certain, stretched far beyond her frame. She spoke not of the fall, but of every time she had been rolled past like scenery. Of every glance that missed her. Of every small effort that was never made. Her words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They carried history, effort, pride, pain, power. Students sat straighter. Teachers leaned in. And somewhere in the bleachers, Troy sat unmoving, his hands folded, his eyes fixed. For once, he didn't hide in laughter or slouch into comfort. He listened. The words Naomi left behind didn't fade. They settled into skin, into memory, into responsibility. Not to fix what had been done, but to do better with what would come next. When they finished, there was no immediate applause, just a breath, then another. Then hands clapping slow at first, then spreading like rainfall across a roof. No one asked them to speak. But once they did, nothing in the room stayed the same. Because some voices don't echo to be heard, they echo to be felt. The applause had long faded by the time the gym emptied. Students filtered out in hushed clusters, their voices softer, their steps slower. Posters on the walls about kindness and inclusion no longer looked decorative, they looked unfinished. A few teachers lingered behind, exchanging glances that said more than any after-school memo ever could. Brielle returned to her locker in silence, her books untouched in her arms. Naomi wheeled beside her, eyes distant, baton still secured to the side pocket of her backpack. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The gym had held their words. Now the building simply held their weight. Troy walked alone that afternoon. No Chase, no Logan. The hallway that once greeted him with slaps on the back and nods of approval now met him with sidelong looks, some curious, some cold. Not rejection, not scorn, just recognition. As if a mask had slipped off and people were seeing what lay beneath it for the first time. He didn't flinch. He didn't deflect, he just kept walking. Near the library, sunlight spilled through high windows, drawing patterns on the tiled floor. Brielle and Naomi were seated at the last table by the window, a shared book between them, pages flipping slowly. They didn't look up when he entered. He paused near the doorway, hesitating. Then, with quiet steps, he approached, not loud, not swaggering, but unsure. There were no dramatic gestures, no rehearsed apologies, just a shifting of weight, a hand rubbing the back of his neck, a pause that lingered long enough to mean something. Naomi looked up first, her eyes calm, unreadable. Brielle stayed focused on the page, waiting. Troy stood there, awkward and open, no defense left. He said nothing, but his stillness spoke. And Naomi answered not with words, but with a nod that didn't erase the past, only acknowledged it. Her forgiveness wasn't offered like a gift. It was extended like a challenge, do better. The moment passed without fanfare. But something left with him when he walked away, a layer of himself that wouldn't return. By the end of the week, small shifts took root. A door held open, a seat offered at lunch, a nod exchanged in the hallway that once housed silence. It wasn't a revolution, but it was real. Brielle continued to meet with faculty in quiet conversations behind closed doors. Naomi was invited to help lead a peer discussion circle, something the school had never tried before. Students who had once looked through her now looked to her not for inspiration but for truth. Change hadn't come with punishment. It had come with a microphone, a stare held steady, and a single unspoken decision to no longer accept what had been allowed. And for Troy, the loudest shift of all wasn't in how others saw him. It was in how he saw himself. The weeks that followed unfolded without headlines, but not without meaning. There were no banners strung across the halls, no dramatic announcements over the loudspeaker. Yet something at Oak Ridge Junior High had undeniably shifted. It began in the margins, moments too small to notice unless you were looking for them. A classmate slowing down to match Naomi's pace in the hallway. A circle of students adjusting their lunch table to make space without prompting. The janitor quietly reinforcing the ramp edge where the wheel had once caught. The change didn't come from policy. It came from eyes that no longer glanced away, from hands that hesitated before mocking, from laughter that now had limits. Where silence once sat like fog, conversations had begun, unpolished, uncertain, but real. Inside room 204, a new sign appeared, the circle. What started as an empty classroom once a week became something else. Brielle sat at the center the first afternoon, a clipboard resting on her lap, Naomi beside her, arms folded across the baton she never left behind. Only 5 students showed up that day. They didn't talk much, but they stayed. By the second week, there were 12. Some came to listen, some came to speak. Others just needed a space where silence didn't equal surrender. They shared stories of feeling invisible, of being misunderstood, of wondering whether anyone saw them at all. Teachers took notice, not just with praise, but with questions. How can we help? Where do we begin? The school counselor began hosting monthly forums. One science teacher added an accessibility audit as a class project. A history teacher replaced one reading with another written by a girl who used wheels to get to the front of a stage. And in the art hallway, a canvas grew across the brick wall above the lockers. It began with outlines. 2 girls, one standing, one seated, both facing forward. Slowly, color filled in their forms. Around them, words appeared, phrases gathered from the circle, shaped by student hands. At the top, in bold block letters, a single line stood out: respect doesn't ask permission. There was no plaque, no dedication ceremony, no hashtag, just truth. Naomi still rolled through the same halls, but she no longer rolled alone. Her chair no longer felt like the quietest thing in the room. And Brielle. She had stopped waiting for the system to speak. She had given it a voice. Troy passed by the mural once after school, his backpack slung low, his eyes tracing the painted eyes of the girl he once pushed aside. He didn't linger. He didn't pose. But he did pause. Because some walls don't just divide. Some remind us who we became when no one was looking. And in that quiet between what had ended and what was only beginning, Oak Ridge became something new. Not a perfect school, not a model of reform, but a place where seeing someone meant more than looking at them. It meant standing beside them even when they rolled. Spring unfolded slowly. the kind that lingered on windowsills and curled under doors. Oak Ridge Junior High wore the season like a soft coat grass. Greener skies clearer, and whispers of summer threading through every hallway. Yearbooks began to circulate, lockers filled with candy wrappers and signatures, and at the edge of it all, preparations for the spring showcase pulsed quietly in the background. The showcase had always been tradition, an annual exhale of music movement and adolescent awkwardness. Students signed up weeks in advance, singers with trembling hands, dancers with rehearsed steps, magicians hiding scarves and sleeves. But one name on the list surprised everyone too, actually. Brielle Washington, Naomi Rivers. No one saw them rehearse. They met after school in the library at the same back table where pages once turned in silence. This time the silence was deliberate, used as a tool, not a symptom. Together, they pieced together words like beams in a bridge. Naomi's pen carved truth into paper. Brielle gave rhythm to pause. They didn't talk about what the piece meant. They didn't have to. The day arrived in a shimmer of light and nerves. The gym was transformed, folding chairs filled with parents clutching phones, strings of lights casting soft glows across the rafters. Students buzzed backstage, adjusting costumes, checking props, whispering hopes into mirror reflections. When their names were called, the audience shifted, surprised but still. Brielle entered first, shoulders squared, her gaze sweeping across the crowd like a lit fuse. Naomi followed, wheeling forward with grace, sharpened by purpose, her baton nestled across her lap, now more emblem than memory. They reached center court and faced forward. No music played, no lights dimmed, no one knew what was coming. And then Brielle began. Not with volume, but with presence. Her voice cut clean like chalk across slate. Naomi answered not in echoes, but in counterpoint softer, yet anchored. They moved through lines that struck at every silent lunch, every unseen hurt, every doorway too narrow for more than one kind of story. They spoke of stillness misread as weakness. They spoke of silence mistaken for consent. They spoke of rolling through rooms where no one moved to meet them. The audience didn't stir. Even the restless sixth graders forgot to fidget. The air held its breath. And when the final line fell, it wasn't applause that came first. It was stillness earned sacred whole. Then hands rose. Sound built like a wave. Students, parents, teachers all standing. Near the back, the school custodian wiped at his eyes. A teacher held a hand over her heart. And somewhere to the side, Troy stood unmoving. One hand resting over his chest, the other curled tight around his program. The girls left the stage together, not looking back. Because they didn't need to see the impact. They had already written it. Out loud. For everyone. The final week of school arrived not with a bang, but with a hush that settled gently across the campus of Oak Ridge Junior High. The hallways no longer pulsed with noise. The posters curled at the corners. Desks grew bare. Conversations turned wistful. Yearbooks lay open like small confessionals passed between hands waiting for names, hearts, and memories to be sealed in ink. For Naomi Rivers, it was a week of endings. Her transfer to Washington High had been finalized. A better program, more accessibility, a poetry club that met twice a week. Her mother had already begun planning routes, packing boxes, making lists in careful handwriting. But Naomi didn't rush to say goodbye. She moved through the final days with the same quiet resilience that had once been mistaken for fragility. The baton still sat in the side pouch of her backpack, worn smooth now from weeks of being touched, held, and remembered. It wasn't a trophy. It wasn't a symbol. It was a piece of something she had carried and would carry still. Brielle continued attending planning meetings with teachers and counselors. The circle had grown beyond room 204. It was now a recognized program, featured in the summer newsletter, and scheduled to resume in the fall with student-led facilitators. She'd been asked to help co-develop a peer mentorship model, one that didn't rely on test scores or popularity, but on empathy, listening, and lived experience. On the last day of school, the building buzzed with energy that didn't feel like closure, but like quiet anticipation. Locker doors clanged, papers rustled. Someone played music too loud on a portable speaker. But beneath it all was a sense of something permanent, something left behind that wouldn't wash away with summer rain. Naomi arrived early that morning. She wheeled down the same hallway where she had once lain on cold pavement surrounded by silence and stares. Now students stepped aside without being asked. Some smiled, others nodded, but all saw her. Not just the chair, not just the story. Her. She reached the cafeteria and paused. There, taped to the front edge of her favorite table, was a sign, hand-drawn, slightly crooked, written in thick marker with bold letters, reserved for Naomi & Co. Beneath it, 3 chairs had been pulled back. A flower rested in a paper cup at the center. A folded note leaned against it. She didn't unfold it right away. She just looked and smiled. Elsewhere, Brielle stood in the art hallway watching the final brushstrokes being added to the mural. A younger student filled in the space behind the seated girl's wheelchair, a swirl of color that looked like motion and stillness at once. Brielle didn't speak. She just nodded. The mural was done. But the story wasn't. At noon, the last bell rang. Students poured out like water from a dam, laughing, running, calling out names across the lot. Naomi waited by the front doors, her backpack zipped baton secured. Her mother's car pulled up at the curb. Before she left, she turned back once. Brielle was standing near the flagpole. They didn't wave. They didn't rush, but their eyes found each other across the space, and the message passed between them like a thread pulled tight and unbroken. Keep going. Keep writing. Keep rising. Summer came to Austin in thick waves of heat and light. Naomi and her mother packed the car with boxes, books, and hope. One morning in July, they drove south to Selma Naomi's first road trip outside the city. They crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge slowly, wheels bumping over the uneven concrete sunlight streaking across the river below. Her mother told stories of her grandfather, how he had marched there in 1965, how he had once said that courage wasn't in the shouting, but in the staying. Naomi didn't say much, but when they stopped at the memorial, she took the baton from her bag and laid it down for a moment at the base of the stone wall, then picked it back up. Back in Austin, Brielle spent her summer at workshops and planning sessions. She joined a youth council that partnered with local schools to promote equity initiatives. She wrote essays, designed lesson templates, helped draft ideas for new hallway signage. When she had time, she returned to Oak Ridge's library, the one where it all began. She sat at the same back table, sometimes alone, sometimes with others, and sometimes with Troy. He came quietly, never asking to lead, never trying to fix what couldn't be undone. But he listened. He learned. He showed up. By the start of the new school year, he had volunteered to help paint new ramp access markers outside the gym. In September, Washington High hosted its first student open mic night. Naomi signed up last minute, her name barely legible at the bottom of the list. She brought nothing but a folded page in her lap and her voice in her chest. Her poem began like this: "They thought I rolled because I couldn't stand." But rolling was never the absence of strength. It was the shape of it. Somewhere near the back, a junior with green-dyed hair wiped her eyes. Afterward, she waited by the exit, hands shaking just to say thank you. Naomi nodded. She was used to that now, used to being seen. Years passed. Teachers changed. The mural faded slightly under sun and dust. Lockers were replaced, but the story stayed. Whenever new students toured Oak Ridge, someone always pointed to the hallway with the mural and said, "That's where it started." They didn't always explain what it was. Some said it was about inclusion. Others said it was about courage. But those who had been there knew the truth. It was about a chair that fell, and the girl who stood anyway, even when she couldn't, and the other girl who refused to walk past, and the boy who came back not for redemption but for responsibility, and the school that against all odds learned to listen not just with ears but with action. Because real change doesn't shout, it rolls, it waits, it returns, and it writes itself across the walls of places that never expected to remember until they couldn't forget.